Read it back to me, Jung Sae-hoon said, word for word, exactly what he told you in the hallway. Mia Park's hands were steady on her notepad, but her heart was not. Around the boardroom table, 6 board members sat frozen, watching the chairman's eyes fix on his own business partner with an intensity that made the air feel thinner. He told me, Mia said carefully, in the hallway 5 minutes before this meeting, that the Osaka numbers you're about to present are, his words, already outdated, so don't let him embarrass himself with them. Oh Min-suk's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes went very still. That's not what I said to her, he said smoothly. She's mistaken, or lying. Sae-hoon's gaze didn't waver. Mia doesn't misremember things, Min-suk. That's rather the point of hiring her. He paused. And neither, unfortunately for you, do I. To understand how one interpreter's precision unraveled a plot 2 years in the making, we have to go back 3 months. To the desperate afternoon, Mia Park applied for a job she almost couldn't believe was real. Mia Park had graduated top of her interpretation program 18 months earlier, and she had spent every one of those 18 months watching her student loan balance grow faster than her income could shrink it. She had gone into interpretation studies believing, the way ambitious 22-year-olds often believe things, that fluency in 3 languages and a gift for precision would translate cleanly into financial stability. Instead, she had graduated into a market flooded with underpaid freelance gigs, competing against interpreters twice her experience for contracts that paid barely enough to cover rent in a Seoul neighborhood, cramped enough that her studio apartment's kitchen and bedroom occupied functionally the same 11 square meters. Her loan servicer sent monthly statements that Mia had stopped opening the day she received the first one after graduation. The number at the bottom, large enough to make her hands go cold every time she let herself actually look at it. She worked 3 separate freelance contracts simultaneously most months, conference interpretation on weekends, document translation late into weeknights, occasional emergency calls for hospitals and immigration offices that paid well precisely because almost no one wanted the schedule unpredictability that came with them, piecing together an income that technically covered her minimum payments and left almost nothing over for the actual principal underneath them. You need one good contract, said Yuna, Mia's roommate from university and now her closest friend in Seoul, a graphic designer working through her own version of the same financial math. One steady, well-paying client instead of 5 unpredictable ones. You're brilliant, Mia. You shouldn't be exhausting yourself into the ground for scraps. Brilliant doesn't pay rent, Mia said, only half joking, running through her weekly schedule on a shared calendar covered in color-coded blocks that left barely 6 hours a night for sleep most weeks. Steady, high-paying clients don't exactly advertise on the freelance boards I'm checking. It was through a former professor's unexpected recommendation, 3 months before that tense boardroom moment reshaped everything, that Mia first heard about the position, a full-time interpretation contract for a senior finance executive, vague on the specifics of the role, startlingly generous on the salary, requiring absolute discretion and immediate availability. The professor, normally careful about vetting opportunities before passing them along to former students, had seemed unusually hesitant about this one, offering it with the caveat, I don't know everything about this client. Do your own research before you commit. Mia did the research. It turned up little beyond the basics, a finance and investment conglomerate, respected, opaque, run by a chairman named Jung Sae-hoon, who almost never appeared in press coverage, despite the company's considerable size. Nothing alarming exactly, nothing entirely reassuring either. She applied anyway, because the salary attached to the contract would let her make a lump payment against her loan principal large enough to shave years off the timeline, and because Mia Park had learned, over 18 months of exhausting freelance math, that opportunities this specific rarely announced their complications up front. She had no idea that Jung Sae-hoon's finance conglomerate sat atop a far more dangerous set of operations, or that the chairman's mind worked in a way that would make her particular gift, precision, exact recall, an interpreter's obsessive commitment to rendering meaning without distortion, the single rarest thing in his entire organization. Jung Sae-hoon had built his conglomerate, and the vast, carefully hidden network of money laundering and territorial finance operations underneath its legitimate face, over 18 years, inheriting the foundation from his father and expanding it into something considerably larger, considerably more dangerous, and considerably more isolating than anything his father had ever run. What almost no one outside his innermost circle knew was that Sae-hoon possessed a rare form of eidetic memory, the kind that let him recall, with disturbing clarity, entire conversations verbatim years after they occurred. Exact phrasings, exact tones, exact contradictions between what someone said in one meeting and what they claimed to have said in another. It had made him formidable in negotiations. It had also made him, over the years, nearly incapable of trusting anyone at all, because his memory never let him forget a single lie, a single inconsistency, a single small betrayal, and everyone eventually produced at least one. You remember things too precisely for your own peace of mind. His physician had told him once, years earlier, only half joking. Sae-hoon hadn't laughed. The condition had turned particularly brutal 3 years ago, when his closest childhood friend and longtime chief financial officer had been discovered embezzling funds through a series of shell transactions, a betrayal Sae-hoon had seen coming for months before he let himself believe it, because his memory kept replaying small, specific inconsistencies in the man's explanations that anyone with an ordinary memory would have forgotten or excused. He had confronted the friend with 11 months of exact, remembered contradictions laid out in devastating detail, and had felt, in the aftermath, less triumphant than hollowed out. Proof, once again, that closeness simply gave people more specific material to eventually lie about. You need an interpreter for the international investor meetings, his chief operating officer told him, after a negotiation with a Singaporean fund had nearly collapsed over an ambiguous phrase that Sae-hoon's existing translator had rendered too loosely, creating confusion that took weeks to untangle. Someone precise, someone who won't paraphrase when exact wording matters. Sae-hoon agreed, on the same quiet, exhausted condition he applied to almost every new hire now. He wanted someone whose words he would never have to doubt, re-examine, or hold up against his own perfect, punishing memory of what had actually been said versus what someone claimed to have said. No one gets close enough to give me something new to remember against them. That had become Sae-hoon's private, unspoken rule, not cruelty, but a kind of self-preservation built entirely around the terrible gift of never being able to forget exactly how and when and by whom he had been failed. He hired Mia Park the same week her interview concluded, mostly because her test translations came back so precisely, so carefully faithful to the original meaning, without embellishment or softening, that Sae-hoon, Testing her, though he never told her so directly, found himself unable to locate a single inconsistency between what she said a document meant and what it actually, verifiably, meant. He did not yet know how much that precision would come to matter, or how close it would come to costing her everything. The investor board meeting, 3 weeks into Mia's contract, should have been routine, a quarterly review with international stakeholders, conducted mostly in English with occasional Korean asides for internal board discussion, Mia interpreting smoothly between the two, as she had done dozens of times already without incident. She had noticed, in passing, the odd tension in the hallway before the meeting. Oh Min-sok, one of the company's senior partners and a board member of considerable influence, catching her alone near the elevators and offering, in a tone she read as casually collegial rather than sinister, a small piece of advice about the upcoming presentation. The Osaka expansion numbers Sae-hoon's about to present, Min-sok said, lightly, almost warmly, are already outdated. Don't let him embarrass himself relying on them too heavily. You might want to soften your interpretation if he leans on them hard. For his own sake, Mia knew enough to the organization's internal politics to take the comment at face value, simply nodded and moved on, filing it away as one colleague's casual concern for another, nothing more. It became something far more consequential 12 minutes into the meeting, when Sae-hoon, presenting the Osaka figures with characteristic precision, was interrupted by a foreign board member's pointed question about whether the numbers accounted for a recent tariff change, a question that implied, not subtly, that the figures were already known to be outdated, exactly as Min-sok had predicted they'd be challenged. Sae-hoon paused. Something behind his eyes recalculated, fast and cold, the specific remembered phrasing of a hallway conversation he hadn't witnessed but had heard about secondhand from another staff member in passing that morning. Mia, he said, turning to her directly, voice carefully even. Before this meeting, in the hallway, what exactly did Min-sok say to you about these numbers? The entire room went still. Mia understood, in that frozen half-second, that whatever she said next carried weight far beyond a simple factual answer. He told me, Mia said, choosing precision over comfort, exactly as her training and her own stubborn integrity demanded, that the Osaka numbers were already outdated, and that I might want to soften my interpretation if you leaned on them, for your own sake. She paused. I interpreted that as a colleague's concern at the time. I have no way of knowing if it was something else. Min-sok's smooth expression didn't crack, not quite, but something behind his eyes went very still. That's not what I said to her, he said lightly. She's misremembering. Interpreters make small errors under pressure. It happens. Sae-hoon's gaze did not move from him. Mia doesn't misremember things, he said quietly. That's rather the entire point of hiring her. A pause, precise and devastating. And neither, unfortunately for you, do I. Because 3 separate people in this building told me, independently, this morning, that you'd been asking pointed questions about the accuracy of the Osaka figures well before I ever presented them today. That's an unusual amount of advance interest in numbers you claim you never discussed. The room's temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Who are you? Sae-hoon asked Mia afterward, once the meeting had adjourned into a tense, unresolved silence and Min-sok had excused himself with a composure that didn't quite reach his eyes. That you'd risk contradicting a senior partner in front of the entire board, rather than simply softening your answer the way he asked you to? I don't soften things, sir, Mia said honestly, still shaken by the weight of what had just happened around her. That's not what precision means. If I start rounding the truth to make people comfortable, I'm not actually doing my job anymore. Sae-hoon looked at her for a long moment, something calculating and, underneath it, almost relieved, moving behind his careful expression. In the weeks following the boardroom confrontation, Sae-hoon began relying on Mia for far more than international investor meetings. He requested her presence in smaller, more sensitive internal discussions, ostensibly for interpretation purposes even when every participant spoke fluent Korean, and Mia understood, slowly, that her actual value in those rooms had shifted into something closer to a human recording device, whose account of events Sae-hoon could trust completely, a rare, precious thing in an organization where his eidetic memory otherwise left him constantly, exhaustingly cross-referencing every account against every other account, trusting almost nothing at face value. You told the Hanoi delegation exactly what I said, not what would have made the negotiation easier, he told her once, reviewing a translated transcript she'd prepared. Most people in your position would have smoothed the sharper edges out of my phrasing to keep the room comfortable. If I smooth your words, I'm making decisions on your behalf that aren't mine to make, Mia said simply. You hired me to be exact. Comfortable and exact aren't always the same thing, and I don't think you'd actually want me choosing comfortable if you had to pick. I wouldn't, Sae-hoon agreed, something in his expression loosening slightly. It was during one of these late working sessions, weeks into the arrangement, that Mia refused, for the first time, to be handled the way Sae-hoon's staff often handled sensitive matters around him, carefully, indirectly, managing his reactions rather than simply stating things plainly. He had asked her, testing her the way he tested most new people eventually, whether she found his memory unsettling, the way most people who learned about it eventually admitted they did. A little, Mia said honestly, refusing the easy, flattering lie that would have been simpler to offer. It sounds exhausting, honestly, not because it's frightening, but because I don't know how anyone rests with a mind that precise running constantly underneath everything. That sounds less like a gift and more like a weight most days. Sae-hoon was quiet for a long moment, surprised, she realized later, by an answer that neither minimized his condition nor treated it as some sinister mystery. It is a weight, he admitted finally. Every betrayal replays in exact detail, forever, whenever something reminds me of it. I don't get the mercy of forgetting the way other people do. I remember my father's disappointment in me at 19 with the same clarity I remember what happened 3 years ago with my former CFO. Nothing fades. It just accumulates. That sounds lonely, Mia said quietly. It is, Sae-hoon said, which is, I think, why your particular gift matters to me more than I expected it to. Your words are the only ones in this building I never have to hold up against themselves later, checking for the gap between what you said and what you meant. There isn't a gap. You just say the thing. Mia felt something in her chest tighten at the quiet, unguarded weight of that admission, recognizing, without fully naming it yet, how rare it was for this careful, isolated man to hand anyone something so plainly true about himself. Over the following weeks, a small, unlikely found family rhythm took shape around the edges of the working relationship. Sae-hoon's older sister, Jung Sae-jin, a warm, sharp-tongued woman who managed the family's charitable foundation and had watched her brother grow more isolated for years, began inviting Mia to family dinners under the thin pretense of needing translation help for foreign donor correspondence, transparently delighted by the shift she noticed in her brother whenever Mia was in the room. He laughs more since you started, Sae-jin told Mia bluntly, over dinner one evening. I haven't heard that sound out of him in longer than I want to admit. Mia, embarrassed and quietly pleased, deflected the observation with practiced ease, but she'd noticed it too. Oh Min-sok had been a senior partner in Sae-hoon's organization for 9 years, respected on the board, trusted with considerable influence over the finance conglomerate's international deals, and for the last 2 years, he had been quietly, methodically working to force a leadership vote that would strip Sae-hoon of operational control and install Min-sok in his place. His justification, at least to himself, had started as genuine professional conviction. Sae-hoon's memory, Min-sok believed, made him increasingly paranoid, increasingly difficult to work with, increasingly prone to second-guessing deals over inconsistencies no one else in the room had even noticed or cared about. A leadership change, Min-sok told himself, would be good for the organization. A rational correction rather than a betrayal. The conviction had curdled, over 2 years, into something considerably less noble, deliberately seeding small inconsistencies into deals Sae-hoon oversaw, quietly feeding board members doubts about the chairman's judgment, orchestrating exactly the kind of confusion that would make Sae-hoon's exacting, memory-driven leadership style look like a liability rather than an asset, building a case for a leadership vote, one carefully manufactured crisis at a time. Mia's arrival had complicated the plan considerably. Her precision closed the exact gap Min-sok had been quietly exploiting for 2 years, the space between what Sae-hoon actually said and did, and the confused, contradictory accounts that used to circulate afterward, accounts Min-seok had been carefully shaping to suggest incompetence. With Mia's exact, unimpeachable record of every meeting, every negotiation, every internal discussion she interpreted, that space had all but disappeared. The interpreter is becoming a problem. Min-sok told his contact on the board, a quiet ally he'd been cultivating for the eventual leadership vote, over drinks in a private room he'd swept for listening devices. Every ambiguity I used to work with, she closes immediately. If this continues, the board won't have enough doubt about Sae-hoon's judgment to support a change in leadership. Then remove the ambiguity problem, his contact suggested, coldly practical. Mia, for her part, had noticed things about Min-sok in the weeks since the boardroom confrontation, though she hadn't fully understood their significance yet. The way his questions to her, always framed as friendly, professional curiosity, circled persistently toward what exactly Sae-hoon remembered, and how precisely, and whether certain past conversations might have been recorded or documented anywhere beyond Sae-hoon's own memory. He asks a lot of questions about what gets written down versus what just lives in your memory, she mentioned to Sae-hoon once, cautiously. I don't know your board politics well enough to say if that's normal curiosity or something else. Sae-hoon's expression sharpened. The same careful stillness Mia had learned meant he was calculating something dangerous. Keep noticing, he said quietly. It happened on a Thursday evening, entirely by accident. Mia had stayed late in the office to finish preparing materials for the following week's Singapore negotiations, and had gone to retrieve a reference document from a shared conference room, only to find it occupied, Min-sok, on a call, speaking in a low, urgent tone, through the room's partially open door, the audio spilling faintly into the hallway where Mia stood, frozen, unable to look away or unhear what she was hearing. The board vote needs to happen before quarter's end. While the Osaka confusion is still fresh in everyone's mind, Min-sok said, I need 2 more members leaning my direction, and the interpreter is the last real obstacle. If she stays this precise, this useful to him, the doubt I've spent 2 years building just evaporates. Find something, a visa issue, a loan default, anything that discredits her testimony enough that the board stops trusting her account of what Sae-hoon actually says in these meetings. Mia's stomach dropped through the floor. She understood, with sudden, sickening clarity, exactly how vulnerable her situation actually made her. A young interpreter, financially desperate, with a student loan burden that, framed carelessly enough, could be twisted into a story about someone susceptible to bribery, to compromise, to exactly the kind of financial pressure that made testimony convenient, to discredit rather than difficult. She backed away from the door slowly, heart hammering, and made a decision in the space of a single held breath. Tell Se-hoon everything, immediately, before Min-suk's plan escalated into something neither of them could undo. She never got the chance to reach his office that night. A car Mia didn't recognize idled too long outside her apartment building the following evening, and when she left for what she thought was a routine grocery run, two men attempted a clumsy, hurried grab near the entrance. Min-suk's own desperate improvisation, Mia would later understand, a panicked attempt to remove the one witness whose precision threatened to unravel 2 years of careful manipulation before the leadership vote could proceed. Mia fought harder than either man expected, driving her keys hard into one attacker's hand and screaming loud enough that Se-hoon's security detail, quietly assigned to watch her building since the night she'd flagged Min-seok's strange questions weeks earlier, a precaution Se-hoon had never mentioned to her directly, arrived within 90 seconds, subduing both men before the car could pull away. She was shaking, bruised at the wrist, unharmed but deeply rattled, when Se-hoon arrived minutes later, his usual careful composure entirely gone, replaced by something raw and furious that Mia had never seen on him before. Min-suk, he said, the name landing like a verdict. Se-hoon called an emergency board session 2 days later, calmly, without revealing what awaited the room, and Min-suk arrived composed, confident, entirely unaware of how thoroughly his own careless words on a recorded call had already sealed his fate. Before we discuss the leadership vote request some of you have received, Se-hoon said, addressing the full board, I want to discuss a conversation Min-suk had 2 nights ago in the 4th floor conference room about discrediting my interpreter before quarter's end. He let that land. For those of you keeping track, that's the same interpreter whose precision has been closing exactly the ambiguity gaps Min-suk has spent 2 years quietly exploiting to make my judgment look unreliable to this board. Min-suk's composure cracked instantly. Se-hoon, that call was private, taken entirely out of context. I have the full recording, Se-hoon said flatly. Captured the moment my security detail confirmed the same men who tried to abduct Mia outside her apartment 2 nights ago were connected to a number you've called 11 times this month. He laid a folder across the table, precise and unhurried. 2 years of manufactured inconsistencies in deals you personally oversaw. A leadership vote built entirely on doubt you engineered yourself. And, 2 nights ago, an attempt to physically remove the one person whose accurate memory of events threatened to expose all of it. Mia, standing near the door exactly as she had the night everything first cracked open in the boardroom, stepped forward, not out of fear, but out of the same instinct that had made her answer honestly the very first time Min-suk's name came up in that first tense meeting. I have my own notes from every meeting I've interpreted for both of you over the last 3 months, she said quietly, holding up a bound notebook. Precise, time-stamped, and already reviewed by outside counsel. They corroborate everything the chairman just laid out. Min-suk's face collapsed entirely, the last of his composure gone. Se-hoon's justice, when it came, was precise rather than violent. Full exposure of the manufactured deal inconsistencies and the attempted abduction delivered to the full board and, quietly, to the regulatory bodies that oversaw the conglomerate's legitimate finance operations, ensuring Min-suk's removal came with consequences that would follow him well beyond a single lost leadership vote. He was stripped of his partnership, his board seat, and every professional relationship that had taken him 2 decades to build. A fate, Se-hoon noted, with quiet finality, was considerably more permanent than anything a single vote could have cost me. In the weeks after Min-suk's exposure, something in the organization, and in Se-hoon himself, settled into a shape that surprised even his sister. The board, chastened and grateful in equal measure, voted unanimously to formally commend Mia's role in exposing the manipulation, a gesture so far beyond her modest interpreter's contract that Mia found herself, For the first time in 18 months, in a room full of powerful people who saw her clearly rather than through her. Sae-hoon, for his part, made a change that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with a lesson Mia had taught him without ever intending to teach it. I built my whole life around the idea that my memory made trust nearly impossible, he told her one evening, the two of them sharing a quiet dinner at his sister's insistence, though Hyejin had tactfully excused herself early. Every inconsistency I've ever caught confirmed that belief. You're the only person whose words I've never once had to hold up against themselves, looking for the gap. I didn't think that was possible anymore. I never tried to be that for you, Mia said honestly. I just tried to do my job well. That's all this ever was from where I was standing. That's not all it was, Sae-hoon said quietly. Not for a long time now. He asked, carefully, without his usual guarded practicality, whether she would consider staying, not simply as his interpreter, but as something he was still learning how to name properly, something closer to a partner whose honesty he had come, slowly, to need rather than simply appreciate. Mia thought of her loan balance, meaningfully smaller now. Of 18 exhausting months spent proving her worth to rooms that barely registered her presence, of a man whose mind never let him rest and who had, despite that, chosen to trust her completely, precisely because she never gave him a reason not to.